3 months after the events at Zephyria Prime, the galaxy had indeed become a very different place. The arena that had once hosted gladiatorial games now served as the headquarters for the Galactic Defense Alliance, a new organization dedicated to protecting peaceful species from aggressive expansion by militant empires. Sarah Chen, now bearing the rank of lieutenant despite her age, stood in what had once been the VIP viewing area, looking out at the transformed space below. The arena floor had been converted into a sophisticated command center, with beings from dozens of species working together to coordinate defensive strategies and humanitarian missions across known space. Remarkable, isn't it? Escorth's familiar rumble came from behind her. The ancient Draconic had become something of a permanent fixture at the headquarters, serving as an unofficial advisor and historical consultant. In 8 centuries, I have never seen such rapid political transformation. Sarah turned to greet him with a smile that was both more mature and somehow still utterly childlike. "Hello, honored Escorth. I was just thinking about how strange it is to be back here." "Strange how?" he asked, settling his massive bulk onto a platform designed to accommodate his size. "3 months ago I came here expecting to die," Sarah said simply. "Now I'm helping coordinate relief efforts for 3 different refugee crises and working on my high school equivalency exams." She gestured toward a nearby workstation, where a tablet displayed both tactical readouts and algebra homework. "Growing up during wartime makes everything feel a little surreal. And how does it feel to be considered one of the most influential humans in the galaxy?" Escorth asked with amusement. "I understand that several universities have offered you full scholarships based entirely on your arena demonstration." Sarah laughed, the sound brightening the entire command center. "My grandmother says I have to finish middle school first, regardless of how many alien governments want to study my tactical innovations. She's very strict about education." "Wise woman, your grandmother," Escorth observed. "Speaking of whom, I believe she has called a meeting." "Right," Sarah said, checking her chronometer. "The monthly Alliance review. Want to sit in? You always have interesting perspectives." They made their way to the main conference chamber, where representatives from 47 different species had gathered to discuss the Alliance's progress. The diversity was staggering. Crystalline beings that communicated through harmonic resonance, gaseous entities that existed in specialized containment suits, insectoid hive minds that spoke in perfect unison, and dozens of other forms of life that had never before sat at the same table. Fleet Admiral Chen presided over the meeting with the easy authority of someone who had spent decades managing impossible situations. At 73, she was considered young by draconic standards, but ancient by human ones, and her silver hair and lined face spoke of a lifetime spent in service to others. "Before we begin," she announced, "I want to acknowledge the remarkable progress we've made in such a short time. Refugee resettlement is ahead of schedule. Our rapid response teams have successfully intervened in 6 potential conflicts, and we've established permanent diplomatic relations with over 200 species." Applause filled the chamber, but Admiral Chen raised a hand for silence. "However, we face new challenges. Intelligence reports suggest that several militant factions are forming alliances of their own, specifically to counter our growing influence." A holographic display materialized in the center of the chamber, showing star charts marked with areas of concern. The assembled representatives studied the data with the serious attention of beings who understood that their peaceful cooperation had made them a target for those who preferred the old ways of conquest and domination. "The hegemony of Kalar has been particularly vocal in their opposition to our alliance," continued Captain Torres, a human officer who served as the Alliance's intelligence coordinator. "They've characterized us as a human-dominated conspiracy to overthrow the natural order of galactic civilization." Sarah snorted with amusement. "The natural order where strong species enslave weak ones? Yeah, we're definitely opposed to that." Her comment drew chuckles from around the chamber, but Admiral Chen's expression remained serious. "The concern is that they're building a coalition based on fear of human capabilities. They're claiming that we represent an existential threat to non-human species. Do we?" The question came from Ambassador Tessera, who had become one of the Alliance's strongest supporters. "I ask not out of suspicion, but because we need to understand how our opponents see us." It was a fair question, and one that had been debated extensively in human military and political circles. The technological advances gained through reverse engineering Kethmoran equipment had given humanity capabilities far beyond what most species possessed. The question of how to use that advantage responsibly was one that kept ethicists and strategists awake at night. "We represent a threat to any species that believes might makes right," Sarah said carefully. "But that's intentional. The whole point of the alliance is to make aggressive expansion too costly to attempt." "But what about species that feel threatened by our very existence?" asked Representative Vorth of the Crystalline Consensus. "How do we address their concerns without compromising our defensive capabilities?" Admiral Chen looked to her granddaughter, who had become the Alliance's de facto expert on asymmetric warfare and human psychology. Despite her age, Sarah's insights had proven invaluable in understanding how different species perceived human motivations. "We invite them to join us," Sarah said simply. "The Alliance isn't about human dominance, it's about collective security. Any species that commits to peaceful coexistence and mutual defense is welcome, regardless of their past conflicts with humanity. Even the Kethmorans?" Representative Vorth pressed. "Even species that have actively opposed us?" "Especially them," Sarah replied. "The Kethmorans were our enemies, but they learned from their mistakes. Now they're some of our most effective partners because they understand both the cost of aggression and the benefits of cooperation." As if summoned by the mention of his species, Commander Vextal entered the chamber. The once proud Kethmoran officer had undergone a remarkable transformation in the months since his humiliation in the arena. His scales now bore the deep blue coloration that indicated genuine respect, and his demeanor had changed from arrogant dominance to thoughtful cooperation. "My apologies for the delay," he said, his English much improved from their first encounter. "The refugee convoy from the Helix sector required additional escort. Ships, the sight of a Kethmoran commander, apologizing to a room full of the species his people had once enslaved would have been unthinkable just months ago. Now it was simply another sign of how thoroughly the galaxy's political landscape had shifted. "Commander," Admiral Chen said, "we were just discussing the growing opposition to our alliance. Do you have any insights into how militant factions are recruiting support?" Vextal's expression grew troubled. "They prey on fear, Admiral. Fear of change, fear of losing traditional power structures, fear of being held accountable for past actions." He looked directly at Sarah. "They paint humans as an unstoppable force that will eventually consume all other species, and then, how do we counter that narrative?" Sarah asked. "By continuing to prove them wrong," Vextal replied. "Every refugee we save, every conflict we prevent, every species we welcome as an equal partner, it all demonstrates that human strength serves a greater purpose than conquest." Skorth nodded approvingly. "Wise words. In my experience, the best way to defeat fear is through consistent action that contradicts it." "That's exactly what we'll do," Admiral Chen declared. "We'll continue building, continue growing, continue proving that cooperation is stronger than conflict." She looked around the chamber at the incredible diversity of beings who had chosen to work together. The old galaxy was built on the principle that the strong devour the weak. We're building a new one based on the idea that everyone becomes stronger when they stand together. And if the militant factions refuse to accept that new galaxy, Ambassador Thesera asked. Sarah's smile was gentle but absolutely implacable. "Then they'll discover why it's never a good idea to threaten someone's family," she said. "Humans have learned a lot about protecting the things we care about. And we care about all of you now." The meeting continued for several more hours, covering logistics, strategic planning, and the countless details involved in managing an alliance that spanned hundreds of worlds. But as the session wound down, Skorth found himself reflecting on the broader implications of what he had witnessed. 3 months ago, a 13-year-old human girl had been thrown to what her captors assumed would be certain death. Instead, she had demonstrated that humanity represented something entirely new in galactic civilization, a species that could turn any adversity into strength, any challenge into an opportunity for growth. Now that same girl was helping to reshape the political structure of the entire galaxy, creating alliances based on mutual respect rather than fear, building a civilization where strength served protection rather than domination. As the representatives filed out of the chamber, each returning to their duties in this grand experiment in cooperative governance, The 6 hours that followed Sarah's demonstration would later be recorded in galactic history as the longest diplomatic crisis ever resolved in so short a time. Throughout those hours, the asteroid that housed the arena became the unofficial center of an empire-spanning debate that would reshape the political landscape of the galaxy. SK Orth had chosen to remain in the arena, fascinated by the opportunity to observe history in the making. The ancient Draconic had positioned himself where he could watch both the human forces and the various alien delegations that had begun arriving via emergency transport. Word of the confrontation had spread with incredible speed, drawing representatives from dozens of species who wanted to witness the outcome firsthand. Sarah herself had become something of a celebrity, though she seemed largely unaware of the attention. She sat cross-legged in the center of the arena, using a portable device to maintain homework assignments that her grandmother had apparently insisted she complete despite the circumstances. The sight of a 13-year-old doing algebra while surrounded by the paralyzed forms of enemy soldiers struck many observers as either deeply disturbing or oddly reassuring. "Tell me, young human," Skorth called out during a brief lull in the activity, "is this how your species normally conducts diplomacy?" Sarah looked up from her math problems with a slightly embarrassed expression. "Oh no, sir. Usually we try talking first." But the Kethmorans didn't seem interested in conversation. She gestured toward the still unconscious Commander Vextal. "They preferred dramatic gestures, so we gave them one." "And the neural disruptor?" Skorth asked, genuinely curious. "Did you truly construct that from prison materials?" "Well, mostly," Sarah admitted. "I had some components hidden in my clothes when I was captured. Standard issue for deep infiltration missions." She held up the device. "But the power source is definitely improvised. I used the chemical reaction from mixing cleaning supplies to generate the electrical charge." The casual way she discussed building weapons from household items sent a chill through several nearby observers. This wasn't a special forces operative or a trained assassin. This was a middle school student who had learned to build military-grade equipment as a matter of survival. "How many others like you are there?" The question came from Kreltar, who had been listening with growing unease. Sarah's expression grew thoughtful. "Like me specifically? Maybe a few dozen who've had similar training and experience." She paused. "But human children in general? All of us learn the basics now. Chemistry, electronics, tactical thinking, survival skills. It's just part of growing up during wartime." The implications were staggering. An entire generation of humans was being raised with the knowledge and skills necessary to conduct asymmetric warfare against technologically superior opponents. What would happen when those children became adults? As if reading his thoughts, Sarah added, "My little brother is only 8, but he can already build communication equipment from scrap metal. My cousin who's 10 can hack into most computer systems given enough time." She smiled with obvious pride. Humans adapt really quickly when they need to. A commotion near one of the arena entrances announced the arrival of a new group of observers. These were clearly high-ranking officials from various galactic governments, their elaborate uniforms and ceremonial accessories marking them as beings of considerable political importance. Leading the group was someone that made even Skorth straighten with surprise. Ambassador Thyssera of the Galactic Council, one of the most powerful diplomatic figures in known space. The fact that she had come personally rather than sending a subordinate spoke to the magnitude of what was happening. "Sergeant Chen," Ambassador Thyssera said, her melodious voice carrying easily across the arena, "I am here as a representative of the Galactic Council. We are concerned about the implications of today's events." Sarah stood and offered a respectful bow. "Ambassador, I'm honored by your presence. How can humanity assist the Council?" The formal politeness of the exchange was almost surreal, given that it was taking place in an arena surrounded by unconscious alien soldiers and the debris of a shattered empire. "We need to understand your species' intentions," the ambassador continued. "The technology you've demonstrated today represents a significant shift in the galactic balance of power. The Council must know, do humans seek conquest or coexistence?" "That depends," Sarah replied carefully, "on how the galaxy chooses to treat us." She gestured toward the displays which still showed the human fleet surrounding the asteroid. "Humans didn't start this war, Ambassador. We were attacked without provocation. Our worlds burned, our people enslaved. Everything you've seen today is a direct response to aggression against us. But surely," Ambassador Thyssera said, "you understand that your methods are Unconventional. Using children as soldiers, building weapons from common materials, conducting warfare in ways that violate most civilized conventions. Sarah's expression hardened slightly. With respect, Ambassador, most civilized conventions assume that all sides have equal access to resources and technology. When you're fighting for survival against an enemy that outguns you 1,000 to 1, you use whatever methods are necessary. And when the war is over, the ambassador pressed, what guarantee do we have that humanity won't turn these methods against other species? It was a fair question, and everyone in the arena waited for Sarah's answer. The response would likely determine not just the fate of the Kethmoran Empire, but humanity's place in the galactic community. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her young face serious as she considered her words. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a maturity that seemed far beyond her years. Ambassador, my grandmother likes to tell a story about Earth's history. Centuries ago, humans developed weapons capable of destroying our entire planet. For decades, we lived under the threat of total annihilation. But instead of using those weapons, we learned to control them. We learned that true strength isn't the ability to destroy. It's the wisdom to know when not to. She looked around the arena, meeting the eyes of beings from dozens of different species. Humans don't want to conquer the galaxy, Ambassador. We want to be left alone to rebuild our worlds and raise our children in peace. But we also want to make sure that what happened to us never happens again, to us or to anyone else. And how do you propose to ensure that? Ambassador Thisara asked. By making the cost of aggression too high to contemplate, Sarah replied simply. By showing potential conquerors exactly what they'll face if they choose to attack innocent civilians. She gestured toward the paralyzed Kethmorans. Today's demonstration wasn't about showing off human superiority. It was about education. The communication system crackled to life again, interrupting the diplomatic exchange. This is Fleet Admiral Chen. We have received the Kethmoran Empire's response. The arena fell silent as everyone waited for the announcement that would determine the immediate future of galactic civilization. The Kethmoran High Command has agreed to all human terms. The Admiral's voice continued. Complete withdrawal from human space, release of all prisoners, and payment of reparations. Additionally, they have requested to open formal diplomatic relations with the Terran Defense Force. A collective sigh of relief swept through the arena. War had been averted, at least for now. Furthermore, Fleet Admiral Chen added, the Kethmoran Empire has formally requested to join the defensive alliance we are proposing to establish with other peaceful species. This announcement caused a much stronger reaction. The idea that the Kethmorans, who just hours ago had been conducting gladiatorial games with human prisoners, would now be seeking protection from humans was almost incomprehensible. Sarah smiled at the expressions of shock around her. Humans are very forgiving, Ambassador, she said to Thisara. We don't hold grudges against people who learn from their mistakes. Her expression grew serious again. But we never forget the lessons that those mistakes teach us. And what lesson has today taught you? The ambassador asked. Sarah's smile turned slightly predatory. That the galaxy is full of bullies who think might makes right. And bullies, she added with the satisfied tone of someone who had just solved a particularly difficult problem, really don't like it when their victims learn to fight back. As the various delegations began the complex process of formal negotiations, Skorth found himself contemplating the broader implications of what he had witnessed. Humanity had just announced its arrival on the galactic stage not with conquest or submission, but with a demonstration of controlled power that was somehow more impressive than either. These humans, he realized, weren't just another warrior species. They were something entirely new, a people who had learned to turn adversity into strength, who could adapt to any challenge, and who had developed the wisdom to know when to show mercy and when to show force. The galaxy, Skorth mused, was about to become a very different place. The human extraction team moved through the arena with the kind of efficiency that spoke of countless hours of training and actual combat experience. They were young, most appeared to be teenagers, but they carried themselves with the confidence of seasoned veterans. Each wore simple, dark uniforms that seemed to absorb light, and their weapons were clearly human in design, sleek, practical, and utterly foreign to anything the galaxy had seen before. Sarah floated down to meet the team leader, A boy who couldn't have been more than 16, but whose eyes held the weight of someone much older. The reunion was brief, but warm. A quick hug, a whispered exchange of words, and then they were both back to business. Status of the civilian population? Sarah asked, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to command despite her age. All non-Kethmoran beings are secure, the team leader replied. Medical teams are standing by for anyone affected by the gravity disruption or atmospheric changes. The slaves in the holding areas have been freed and are being processed for repatriation. Escorth watched this exchange with growing fascination. These children, and they were clearly children despite their competence, were conducting a military operation with the precision of a species that had been fighting interstellar wars for centuries. Yet humans had only been spacefaring for a few decades. Honored Escorth, Sarah said, turning to address the ancient draconic. I apologize for the disruption to your visit. Would you be willing to serve as a neutral observer to what happens next? What happens next? Scorth's golden eyes gleamed with curiosity. This demonstration wasn't the end. Sarah's expression grew serious. This was just the opening statement. Now comes the actual negotiation. As if summoned by her words, the arena's main display screens flickered to life. The image that appeared made every conscious being in the arena fall silent. It showed the space around Zephyria Prime, but the familiar view had been transformed into something from a nightmare. Where once there had been the proud fleet of the Kethmoran Empire, now there were only dark, lifeless hulks drifting in the void. Hundreds of warships, each capable of reducing a planet to rubble, now floated helplessly like abandoned toys. But that wasn't the truly terrifying part. The terrifying part was what surrounded them. Human ships filled the space around the asteroid, but these weren't the desperate improvised vessels that the Kethmorans had been fighting for months. These were sleek, predatory things that seemed to bend light around their edges. They moved with a fluid grace that spoke of technology far beyond anything the galaxy had thought humans possessed. How? The word escaped from Kreltar in a strangled whisper. How is this possible? 6 months ago, humans barely had faster-than-light travel. Sarah heard the question and smiled with something that might have been pity. 6 months ago, honored Kreltar, humans barely had faster-than-light travel that you knew about. We've been studying your technology since the moment you arrived in our space. Every ship you destroyed, every battle you won, every piece of debris you left behind, it all taught us something new. The display changed, showing technical schematics that made several of the more scientifically minded beings in the audience gasp in recognition and horror. The humans hadn't just copied Kethmoran technology. They had improved it, refined it, made it better. You see, Sarah continued, her voice taking on the tone of a teacher explaining a particularly important lesson. Humans have a gift for taking things apart and putting them back together in ways their original creators never imagined. We call it reverse engineering, and we're very, very good at it. A new voice came through the communication system, older and more authoritative than Admiral Rodriguez. This is Fleet Admiral Chen of the Terran Defense Force. I am Sarah's grandmother. The announcement sent another ripple of shock through the crowd. The idea that this military operation was being conducted by a family unit was completely alien to most galactic civilizations. Commander Vextal, the elderly voice continued, you made a critical error when you decided to use my granddaughter for entertainment. You gave us exactly the excuse we needed to demonstrate why the war against humanity needs to end immediately. Vextal, still paralyzed by Sarah's neural disruptor, could only listen as his world crumbled around him. Here are the terms, Fleet Admiral Chen continued. The Kethmoran Empire will withdraw from all human space immediately. All human prisoners will be released. Reparations will be paid for the worlds you've damaged. A pause. In return, we won't demonstrate what our weapons can actually do when we're not trying to minimize casualties. The threat hung in the air like a physical presence. Everyone in the arena could see the human ships surrounding them, could see the dead Kethmoran fleet, could see the casual way that human children had taken control of what should have been an impregnable fortress. And if we refuse? The question came from one of the Kethmoran officials who had managed to avoid the worst effects of the neural disruptor. Sarah answered before her grandmother could respond. Then you'll discover why humans don't take prisoners in this war. Her voice was calm, matter-of-fact, but somehow that made it more chilling. Every Kethmoran world, every station, every ship becomes a target, and we've had 8 months to learn where all of them are. She gestured to the displays, which now showed star charts marked with thousands of red indicators. Your empire spans 300 systems. We've identified them all. More importantly, we've identified the specific vulnerabilities of each one. The implications were staggering. The human fleet might be smaller than the full Kethmoran military, but if they could disable ships as easily as they had demonstrated here, numbers became irrelevant. You're bluffing, the Kethmoran official said, but his voice lacked conviction. No species could gather that much intelligence in such a short time. No species, Sarah agreed, except one that spent its entire evolutionary history fighting wars of survival against opponents just as intelligent as they are. She looked directly at the official. Humans don't fight fair, honored representative. We fight to win, and we've gotten very good at it. Escorth found himself nodding slowly. In his 8 centuries of life, he had witnessed the rise and fall of dozens of galactic powers. He had seen species that conquered through superior technology, others that dominated through sheer numbers, and still others that ruled through cunning and manipulation. But he had never seen anything like this. The humans weren't just winning through superior force, they were winning through superior adaptation. They were learning faster than their enemies could evolve new countermeasures. There is another option. Fleet Admiral Chen's voice cut through the tense silence. The Kethmoran Empire can choose to become humanity's ally rather than its enemy. The suggestion caused an immediate uproar among the conscious Kethmorans. Alliance with a species they had considered primitive just hours ago? The idea was almost incomprehensible. Think about it carefully, Sarah added, her voice somehow carrying over the noise. Humans make excellent allies. We're loyal, we're adaptable, and we never forget our friends. Her smile turned predatory. Of course, we also never forget our enemies. The arena fell silent as the weight of the choice settled over everyone present. This wasn't just about ending a war. This was about determining the future of galactic civilization. We need time to consider, the Kethmoran official said finally. Of course, Fleet Admiral Chen replied. You have 6 hours to reach a decision. After that, we assume you've chosen to continue the war. A pause. I should mention that my granddaughter's demonstration today was just a small sample of what human ingenuity can accomplish. If you force us to show you our full capabilities, I guarantee you won't enjoy the experience. As the transmission ended, Sarah looked around the arena at the mixture of species that had gathered to watch her execution. Instead, they had witnessed the transformation of galactic politics. Any questions? She asked brightly, sounding for a moment exactly like the 13-year-old child she was. The silence that followed was answer enough. The panic in the arena grew as Sarah's words sank in, but it was Commander Vextal who recovered first. His scales shifted to the deep black of cold fury as he activated the arena's emergency protocols. Massive blast shields began descending from the ceiling, designed to contain any creature that might threaten the audience. Enough, he roared, his voice amplified across the arena. You think your words can frighten the mighty Kethmoran Empire? You think one human child can change the course of a war? He gestured sharply, and armed guards began pouring into the arena from multiple entrances. You want to send a message? Here's ours. Defiance means death. Sarah watched the approaching soldiers with the same calm attention she had given the Ravager. 50 heavily armed Kethmoran warriors, each carrying weapons that could level buildings, all focused on one 13-year-old girl. To any rational observer, the outcome was obvious. But Scorth had lived for 8 centuries, and he had learned to recognize when rationality was about to be discarded. Commander, he called out, his voice cutting through the noise, perhaps you should consider— The time for consideration is over. Vextal snapped. Guards, kill the human! Make it slow. The lead guard raised his plasma rifle, the weapon humming to life with a sound like distant thunder. But before he could fire, Sarah did something that froze every being in the arena. She closed her eyes and began to sing. It was a simple song, something a child might learn in school. But there was something about the way she sang it, something about the perfect pitch and the absolute calm in her voice, that made it carry to every corner of the arena despite the chaos around her. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. The guards hesitated, confusion replacing their battle readiness. This wasn't how condemned prisoners were supposed to act. Where was the begging, the screaming, the desperate attempts to bargain for life? Up above the world so high like a diamond in the sky, As Sarah sang, something extraordinary began to happen. The other slaves in the arena's holding areas, beings from dozens of different species who had been cowering in their cages, began to stand. One by one they moved to the bars of their cells, drawn by something in the human child's voice. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. The song continued, and with it came a sound that made every Kethmoran in the arena feel ice in their veins. The slaves were singing along. They didn't know the words, couldn't understand the language, but somehow they were harmonizing with Sarah's simple melody. Dozens of voices, then hundreds, all joining in a song that spoke of wonder and hope and the beauty of things beyond reach. "What is this?" Vextal whispered, his scales cycling through colors of confusion and growing fear. But Skorth understood. The ancient Draconic had seen enough of the galaxy to recognize something that the Kethmorans, in their isolation and arrogance, had never encountered. "It's a human war song," he said quietly. "War song?" Kreltar looked at him in confusion. "But it's about stars and wonder. How can that be a war song?" Escorth's golden eyes never left Sarah. "Because only a species that has learned to find beauty in the face of absolute darkness could survive what the humans have survived. Only a people who can sing about wonder while standing in the shadow of death could keep fighting when all hope is gone." Sarah finished her song and opened her eyes. The arena had gone completely silent except for the echoing harmonies of hundreds of slaves who continued the melody in their own voices, their own styles, their own languages. It was beautiful and terrible and absolutely heartbreaking. "You want to know the difference between humans and everyone else?" Sarah asked, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet. "Everyone else fights for territory or resources or power. Humans fight for songs like that. We fight for the right to teach our children about stars they may never see." The lead guard raised his weapon again, but his hands were shaking now. Something about the continued singing, about the way this human child stood so calmly in the face of death, had shaken him in ways he didn't understand. "Fire," Vextal screamed. "Kill her now!" But before anyone could pull a trigger, the arena's communication system crackled to life. A new voice filled the space, speaking in heavily accented Kethmoran with the kind of authority that made everyone pay attention. "This is Admiral Rodriguez of the Terran Defense Force. Any hostile action against our personnel will result in immediate retaliation." The arena erupted into fresh chaos as everyone looked around, trying to find the source of the transmission. But Skorth was looking up, his enhanced vision able to make out shapes that others couldn't see. His expression shifted to something that might have been amazement. "Commander," he said softly, "you might want to look at your orbital defense sensors." Vextal activated his personal communicator, connecting him to the command center. The response came back immediately, and the color drained from his scales so quickly that he looked like he was made of ash. "How many ships?" he whispered into the device. The answer was audible to everyone in the suddenly quiet arena. "We count at least 300 vessels, sir." They appeared on our sensors simultaneously as if they had been cloaked. A pause. "Sir, these aren't the ramshackle civilian ships we've been facing. These are warships. Military vessels designed for combat." Sarah smiled and looked directly at Vextal. "Did I mention that humans are really, really good at learning?" "Impossible," Vextal said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Our intelligence showed no human fleet movements, no military buildups. Your species doesn't have the resources for a fleet that size." "Our species," Sarah replied, "has been building ships in asteroid fields and hidden bases for the past 8 months. Every time you destroyed one of our worlds, the survivors scattered to places you couldn't find. Every time you thought you had won a battle, you were actually helping us learn how to build better weapons." She gestured toward the ceiling, toward the fleet that was now undoubtedly surrounding the asteroid. "Those ships up there? They're crewed by children like me. 13, 14, 15-year-olds who learned to fight by watching their families die. Kids who grew up in the ruins of their homes, building weapons from scrap metal and determination." The communication system crackled again. "Commander Vextal, this is Admiral Rodriguez. You have 30 seconds to release Sergeant Chen, or we will demonstrate why human children make such effective warriors." 30 seconds. Vextal looked around wildly. "They're bluffing." "They wouldn't risk starting a major battle over one prisoner." But Sarah was shaking her head, and for the first time since entering the arena, she looked genuinely sad. "Commander, you really don't understand us at all. We don't leave our people behind, ever. That's what makes us human." The countdown began, transmitted through every speaker in the arena. 29, 28, 27. Vextal's scales were now cycling through every color of fear and panic. He activated his communicator again. Defense fleet! Intercept the human ships! Destroy them! The response was immediate and devastating. Sir, our fleet is already gone. They used some kind of weapon we've never seen before. Our ships just stopped working. No explosions, no debris. They're just floating dead in space. 20, 19, 18. It's called an electromagnetic pulse. Sarah explained helpfully. We learned how to build them by studying your own weapons. Turns out the more advanced your technology, the more vulnerable it is to having its electronics fried. Skorth was watching the proceedings with the fascination of someone witnessing history in the making. Tell me, young human, he called out, what happens when your fleet reaches zero? Sarah looked up at him with those same green eyes that had defied the Kethmarans from the moment of her capture. They demonstrate why you should never ever threaten a human child in front of her family. 10, 9, 8, wait. Vextal screamed. Stop the countdown. We surrender! But Sarah's expression had gone cold. I'm afraid it's too late for that, Commander. You see, humans have a saying, you can't unring a bell. You chose to make this about entertainment. You chose to make this about proving your superiority. She paused as the countdown continued. Now my family is going to prove ours. 3, 2, 1. The arena shook as the first human weapons found their targets. But these weren't the crude nuclear devices or kinetic weapons that the Kethmarans had expected. These were precision strikes that targeted specific systems, specific structures, with an accuracy that spoke of months of careful planning. The lights went out first, plunging the arena into darkness. Then the artificial gravity failed, sending beings floating helplessly through the air. Emergency systems tried to activate, but they too had been targeted with surgical precision. In the darkness, Sarah's voice remained calm and clear. The thing about human children, Commander, is that we learn from everything. Every beating, every loss, every mistake, and when you hurt one of us, you teach all of us. Emergency lighting flickered on, casting eerie shadows across the floating chaos of the arena. Sarah alone seemed unaffected by the lack of gravity, moving with the practiced ease of someone who had trained for exactly this scenario. You wanted to know what humans are capable of? She continued, her voice echoing strangely in the altered acoustics. Let me show you. She reached into her simple. The silence stretched for long seconds before Commander Vextal's bellow of rage shattered it like glass. His scales had shifted to a deep, violent red that spoke of barely controlled fury as he stalked toward the arena's edge. Trickery, he roared, spittle flying from his massive jaws. Some kind of human poison. Technology. There's no way a child could kill a Ravager with her bare hands. But even as he spoke, arena medics were examining the fallen creature under the watchful eyes of the crowd. Their report came back quickly, transmitted through the arena's communication systems for all to hear. No poison, no hidden weapons, no technology. The Ravager had died from a single, precisely placed blow that had severed its spinal cord at exactly the right point. Sarah remained standing in the center of the arena, her small form dwarfed by the massive corpse beside her. She seemed completely unconcerned by the chaos erupting in the stands around her. You want to know the funny thing? She called out, her voice somehow carrying over the noise. Back home before the war, I was considered small for my age. Weak even. I got picked on by kids bigger than me. She laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. I used to cry about it. The crowd was growing restless now, uncertainty replacing their earlier bloodlust. This wasn't how things were supposed to work. Humans were supposed to be primitive, barely above animals in intelligence. They weren't supposed to be able to analyze and defeat Kethmaran bioweapons with surgical precision. Release another beast, someone shouted from the crowd. Something bigger, yes. Vextal seized on the suggestion. If one Ravager wasn't enough, we'll send 3. We'll see how clever this human child is when she's facing a pack. But before the arena gates could open again, Skorth rose from his seat. The ancient Draconics movement was deliberate and slow, but it commanded attention. When a being who had lived for 8 centuries decided to speak, even Kethmarans listened. Commander Vextal, Skorth's voice rumbled across the arena. I believe you're missing the most important lesson this demonstration has provided. Vextal's scales flickered between red and black as he struggled to maintain composure in front of so many witnesses. And what lesson would that be, honored Escorth? This child, Escorth gestured towards Sarah with one massive claw, represents what humans become when you push them to their limits. You said she was 13 years old and has been fighting for 8 months. That means she learned to kill Kethmoran bioweapons before she had finished growing. The old draconic paused to let that sink in. What do you imagine the adult humans are capable of? The question sent a chill through the crowd. They had all heard the reports from the human front, stories that grew more disturbing with each telling. Humans who refused to surrender even when facing impossible odds. Human soldiers who fought on with wounds that should have been instantly fatal. Human civilians who chose death over submission, taking as many Kethmorans with them as possible. At first, the Empire had dismissed these reports as exaggerations, propaganda designed to make the enemy seem more formidable than they actually were. But as the war dragged on, as casualty reports mounted, as entire Kethmoran fleets simply disappeared in human space, the reports became harder to ignore. The adult humans, Sarah said quietly, are much, much worse than me. She began to walk slowly around the Ravager's corpse, her movements casual but somehow predatory. You want to know what humans are really like? Let me tell you about my father. He was an accountant before the war. Spent his days working with numbers. Never hurt anyone in his life, but when your soldiers came to our neighborhood, he fought them for 6 hours with nothing but a kitchen knife and a toolbox. The arena had gone completely silent now. Even the Kethmoran officials seemed mesmerized by her words. He killed 12 of your warriors before they brought him down. 12 trained soldiers killed by a man whose biggest worry used to be tax season. Sarah's voice was matter-of-fact, conversational, but somehow it made the story more chilling. And he wasn't special. He wasn't a soldier or a fighter. He was just a human who got angry. Vextel's scales were now cycling rapidly between different colors, a sign of extreme agitation. You're lying. No civilian could— Am I? Sarah interrupted. How many Kethmoran ships have gone missing in human space? How many colonies have you had to abandon because the casualty rates made them impossible to hold? How many times have your commanders requested reinforcements for what should have been simple mop-up operations? The questions hung in the air like accusations. Everyone in the arena knew the answers, even if they didn't want to admit them. The human war was supposed to have been over in weeks. It had been going on for months, and the Kethmoran advance had stalled completely. Let me tell you about my mother, Sarah continued, her voice growing softer. She was a teacher, 3rd grade. She spent her life helping children learn to read and write. But when your soldiers cornered us in our basement, she held them off long enough for me to escape. Sarah looked directly at Vextel. She used improvised explosives made from household chemicals. The blast took out half a city block. The crowd stirred uneasily. They were beginning to understand that they weren't just listening to the boasts of a captured enemy. They were getting a glimpse into a kind of warfare they had never encountered before. You keep calling us animals, Sarah said, and maybe you're right, but you picked the wrong kind of animal to corner. Humans aren't prey animals, Commander. We're apex predators who learn to use tools, and you've given us 8 months to learn how to use them against you. SS Korth was watching the crowd's reaction with interest. Fear was beginning to replace bloodlust in many faces. The entertainment they had come to enjoy was turning into something much more serious. But here's the thing that really should worry you, Sarah continued, and now her voice carried a note of genuine excitement. Everything I've told you about is what untrained civilians can do when they get angry. What do you think happens when you face humans who were actually bred for war? Bred for war? Vextel's voice was uncertain now. Humans don't breed warriors. Your species is too primitive for proper genetic manipulation. Sarah's laugh was bright and genuine, the sound of a child who had just heard something genuinely funny. Oh, Commander, you really don't understand us at all, do you? We don't need genetic manipulation. We have something much more effective. She spread her arms wide, encompassing the entire arena. We have competition. For thousands of years, humans have been fighting each other, learning from each other, pushing each other to become better killers. Every generation of humans has been tested in war against other humans. The weak died, the strong survived, and the strongest had children. The implications of her words were beginning to dawn on the more intelligent members of the crowd, a species that had been refining its warfare capabilities for millennia, not against animals or primitives, but against equally intelligent opponents. Our best warriors, Sarah continued, aren't bioengineered monsters. They're humans who were good enough to survive fighting other humans. And right now they're in your space learning everything they can about how you fight. She smiled that same quiet smile, and they're teaching that knowledge to others. Vextal's scales had settled on a sickly yellow color that spoke of growing fear. Impossible. Our intelligence reports show that human military forces are scattered, disorganized. Their fleets are outnumbered 1,000 to 1. Your intelligence reports, Sarah said gently, are exactly what we want you to think. Tell me, Commander, in all your battles with humans, how many prisoners have you taken? The question caught Vextal off guard. Prisoners? Humans don't surrender. Exactly. Sarah's smile widened. We don't surrender and we don't retreat. Every battle you think you've won has actually been a learning experience for us. Every ship you destroy transmits everything it learned about your tactics before it dies. Every colony you attack teaches the others how to resist more effectively. She gestured to herself. I was captured because my mission required it. Because someone decided that the Kethmoran Empire needed to understand exactly what they're really fighting. The arena erupted into chaos as the full meaning of her words sank in. This wasn't an execution or entertainment. This was a demonstration. A message. And judging by the panic spreading through the crowd, the message had been received loud and clear. Escorth leaned back in his seat, his golden eyes gleaming with something that might have been approval. Oh yes, he rumbled to himself. This is going to be very interesting indeed. The arena on Zephyria Prime had been carved from a single massive asteroid, its walls rising hundreds of meters into the artificial atmosphere that kept the slave market habitable. The Festival of Conquest drew beings from across the Kethmoran Empire, all eager to witness the brutal spectacles that celebrated their species' dominance over the galaxy. Sarah had spent the night in a holding cell beneath the arena, listening to the sounds of construction above as the Kethmorans prepared for the day's entertainment. Sleep had been impossible not because of fear, but because of the weight of what she knew was coming. The other prisoners in nearby cells had tried to offer comfort, speaking in hushed tones about quick deaths and peaceful afterlives, but Sarah had remained silent. They didn't understand. None of them understood what humans really were. As dawn broke over the asteroid's artificial horizon, the crowd began to gather. Thousands of Kethmorans filled the tiered seating, their scales displaying the bright colors of anticipation and bloodlust. Representatives from dozens of species had come to witness the spectacle, from the insectoid vril to the crystalline shard singers, all drawn by the promise of seeing the newest enemy of the Empire humiliated. In the VIP section, Escorth settled his ancient bulk onto a reinforced platform designed to accommodate draconic physiology. His golden eyes swept the crowd, noting the excitement, the hunger for violence, the absolute certainty that they were about to witness a brief and one-sided slaughter. Beside him, a young Altarian noble leaned over with the casual confidence of someone who had never faced real danger. Tell me, honored Scorth, why did you wish to bet on this human child? Surely even your legendary wealth has better uses than throwing credits away on an impossible outcome. Escorth's response was a low rumble that might have been laughter. Young Kreltar, in my 8 centuries of life, I have learned that the universe's greatest entertainment comes from watching beings who think they understand everything discover how wrong they are. But it's just a human child, Kreltar insisted. What could possibly? The conversation was cut off as trumpets sounded and Commander Vextal strode into the arena's center. His scales gleamed in the artificial sunlight, displaying the deep purple of supreme confidence as he addressed the crowd. Citizens of the Empire, his voice boomed, amplified by the arena's acoustics. Today we celebrate another glorious victory in our righteous expansion across the galaxy. Today we show what happens to those foolish enough to resist our might. The crowd roared its approval, the sound echoing off the arena walls like thunder. Behold, Vextal continued, gesturing toward one of the arena gates, a human child captured after killing 40 of our warriors. The humans, in their desperation, now send their young to die rather than accept the inevitable. The gate ground open with a rumble of ancient machinery, and Sarah stepped into the arena. She looked even smaller in the vast space, her simple prison clothes making her seem fragile and helpless, but those watching carefully might have noticed something odd about her posture. There was no fear in her stance, no trembling in her movements. She walked like someone going to work, not someone walking to their death. And her opponent, Vextal announced, turning toward the opposite gate, is one of our most prized arena beasts, captured from the death worlds of the Outer Rim, trained to kill, bred for violence. Behold, the Ravager! The opposite gate began to open, and the crowd fell silent in anticipation. What emerged was a nightmare given form. The Ravager stood 4 meters tall at the shoulder, its body a twisted fusion of reptile and insect that belonged to no natural evolutionary path. 6 legs ending in razor-sharp claws supported a torso covered in chitinous armor that gleamed like black metal. Its head was a horror of mandibles and compound eyes, while spines along its back dripped with a paralytic venom that had claimed the lives of countless arena victims. The beast had been engineered by the Kethmoran's bioweapon division, combining the worst aspects of dozens of predatory species into a single killing machine. It had never lost a fight. It had never shown mercy. It existed only to kill, and it was very, very good at its job. The crowd's silence broke into cheers and applause as the Ravager emerged fully into the arena. Betting odds, which had already been astronomical against Sarah's survival, now reached numbers that most mathematicians would have considered theoretical. But in the VIP section, Escorth was watching Sarah's face. And what he saw there made his ancient blood run cold. Sarah was smiling. Not the desperate false smile of someone trying to appear brave in the face of death. Not the manic grin of someone whose mind had snapped under pressure. This was the quiet, satisfied smile of someone whose careful plans were finally coming together. The Ravager caught Sarah's scent and let out a roar that shook dust from the arena walls. The sound was designed to freeze prey with terror, to make victims collapse in helpless fear while death approached. Every species in the galaxy had some instinctive response to that sound, some deep genetic memory that screamed of danger. Sarah's smile widened. "Let the entertainment begin." Vextal shouted, and the arena barriers sealed with a hiss of hydraulics. The Ravager wasted no time. It charged across the arena floor with surprising speed for something so massive, its claws tearing gouges in the reinforced surface as it bore down on the small human figure. Sarah stood perfectly still, watching its approach with the calm attention of someone studying an interesting problem. The crowd held its breath, expecting to see her torn apart in seconds. Instead, Sarah took a single step to the side. The Ravager's charge carried it past her by mere centimeters, its momentum too great to change direction. Confused by its miss, the creature skidded to a halt and spun around, compound eyes focusing on its target with renewed interest. "Lucky dodge," someone in the crowd called out, and laughter rippled through the arena. The Ravager attacked again, this time more carefully, using its multiple limbs to strike from different angles simultaneously. Sarah moved like water, flowing between the creature's attacks with an economy of motion that seemed almost lazy. Each movement was minimal, precise, designed to avoid death by the smallest possible margin. The laughter in the crowd began to fade as the dance continued. This wasn't luck. This was skill, but it was more than skill. As Escorth watched, he began to understand what he was seeing. Sarah wasn't just avoiding the Ravager's attacks. She was studying them, learning them. Each dodge brought her slightly closer to the creature. Each movement seemed to anger it a little more. The Ravager, bred for killing, began to show signs of frustration. Its attacks became wilder, less controlled. Venom dripped from its spines as it tried repeatedly to corner the elusive human. But Sarah always seemed to be exactly where she needed to be to avoid destruction. "What is she doing?" Kreltar whispered, leaning forward in his seat. "Why doesn't she just die?" Escorth's response was barely audible. "Because," the ancient Draconic said, "she's not the one trapped in this arena." As if responding to his words, Sarah's pattern suddenly changed. Instead of dodging the Ravager's next attack, she stepped directly into it, moving faster than anyone in the crowd had thought possible. Her small fist connected with a specific spot on the creature's armored neck, just below where its head joined its torso. The impact was barely audible over the crowd's gasps. The Ravager froze mid-attack, its eyes going wide with something that might have been surprise. Then slowly, inevitably, the massive creature toppled backward and lay still. The arena fell into absolute silence. Sarah stood over the Ravager's body, breathing hard but uninjured. She looked up at the crowd, that same quiet smile still on her face, and spoke in a voice that somehow carried to every corner of the arena. "My name is Sergeant Sarah Chen of the Terran Defense Force. I am 13 years old, and I have been fighting in this war for 8 months. She paused, letting that sink in. 8 months ago, I was in middle school, worried about math tests and whether Tommy Rodriguez would ask me to the spring dance. The crowd stirred uneasily. This wasn't how arena spectacles were supposed to go. But then you came to my world, Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength. You burned my school. You killed my teachers. You murdered my parents while I hid in our basement. Her smile faded, replaced by something much colder. You made me into what I am now. Vextal stepped forward, his scales displaying the deep red of rage. Impossible. That creature was unstoppable. No child could. You want to know how I killed your monster? Sarah interrupted. The same way I've killed everything else you've sent at me. I learned. I adapted. I found the weakness. She looked directly at Vextal. Everything has a weakness. Even you. The crowd began to mutter among themselves, confused and increasingly unsettled. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was something else entirely. But Skorth was smiling now, an expression that revealed teeth the size of sword blades. Oh, he rumbled quietly. This is going to be very interesting indeed. The slave markets of Zephyria Prime buzzed with the usual cruelty that made most civilized species look away in disgust. Cages lined the dusty streets filled with beings from across the galaxy who had the misfortune of crossing paths with the Kethmoran Empire. The Kethmorans themselves were massive reptilian creatures standing nearly 3 meters tall, with scales that shifted between deep purple and black depending on their mood. Their forearms ended in razor-sharp claws, and their faces bore the permanent sneer of beings who had never known defeat. Commander Vextal strode through the market with the confidence of someone who owned everything he saw. His scales displayed the deep purple of satisfaction as he inspected the latest shipment of slaves. Most were the usual fare. Altarian miners with their tough crystalline skin, a few Corvani with their bird-like features that made them excellent scouts, and some Zalathian technicians whose small, gray forms housed brilliant minds perfect for maintaining complex machinery. But today there was something different. Something that made several Kethmoran officers gather around one particular cage, their guttural laughter echoing through the marketplace. Look at this pathetic creature, snarled Captain Morketh, his secondary arms gesturing dramatically toward the cage. The humans actually sent this to fight us? This small pink thing that barely reaches my knee? Inside the cage sat a human girl who couldn't have been more than 13 years old. Her brown hair was matted with dirt and dried blood, her simple clothes torn from whatever battle had led to her capture. But despite the obvious fear in her green eyes, she held her chin up with a defiance that seemed almost comical given her size. The other Kethmorans joined in the laughter. In the 3 months since they had begun their invasion of human space, they had encountered the strangest resistance. Most species, when faced with the overwhelming might of the Kethmoran Empire, either surrendered immediately or were crushed within days. But humans? Humans kept fighting even when the odds were impossible. They kept fighting even when their ships were destroyed, their cities burned, their armies scattered, and apparently, they were so desperate that they were now sending children to war. What's your name, little human? Vextal asked, switching to the crude human language he had been forced to learn. His voice came out as a harsh rasp that made several nearby slaves flinch. The girl looked up at him with those defiant green eyes. Sarah Chen, she said, her voice steady despite the tremor he could detect underneath. Sergeant Sarah Chen, Terran Defense Force, serial number. Enough! Morketh's roar cut her off. Sergeant? They made this tiny thing a sergeant? What's next? Are they going to promote their pets to admiral? The laughter grew louder, and other species in the marketplace began to take notice. Word spread quickly through the crowd about the human child who claimed to be a soldier. Soon, beings from across the galaxy were pointing and staring, some with pity, others with the same cruel amusement as the Kethmorans. But it was an elderly draconic merchant who changed everything. Skeorth was old even by draconic standards. His once brilliant golden scales now faded to a dull bronze. His massive wings folded tight against his back as he moved through the market on legs that had carried him across the galaxy for over 8 centuries. The Draconics were one of the few species that even the Kethmorans treated with respect, partly because of their immense individual power, and partly because they had long ago withdrawn from galactic politics to focus on trade and scholarship. Interesting, Skorth rumbled, his deep voice carrying easily over the crowd's noise. A human child in the slave markets. Tell me, Kethmorans, did this one surrender or did you have to fight to capture her? Vextel's scales shifted toward a darker shade. The humans had her operating some kind of communications equipment in what they called a hardened bunker. It took us 6 hours and the lives of 40 warriors to dig her out. 6 hours. Skorth's golden eyes fixed on Sarah with new interest. And 40 warriors? For one human child? She had help, Morketh said quickly, his scales now showing the red tinges of embarrassment. Other humans, older ones. We killed them all, of course. Of course. Skorth's tone was neutral, but those who knew Draconics well might have detected a note of something else underneath. And what do you plan to do with her now? The question seemed to amuse Vextel. We were just discussing that. Some of my officers think we should simply execute her as an example to other humans, but I have a more entertaining idea. He gestured toward the far end of the marketplace where a massive arena had been carved into the living rock of the asteroid. Tomorrow is the Festival of Conquest. What better entertainment for our citizens than watching this sergeant face one of the arena beasts? The crowd's reaction was immediate and enthusiastic. Betting pools began forming instantly, with odds heavily favoring whatever creature they would pit against the small human. Most bets weren't even on whether she would survive, that was considered impossible, but on how quickly she would die. Sarah's face had gone pale at the mention of the arena, but she still didn't break. I'm a prisoner of war, she said, her voice carrying further than it should have been able to. The Galactic Convention on the Treatment of Prisoners clearly states, The Galactic Convention, Vextel interrupted, applies only to civilized species. Humans have proven themselves to be nothing more than particularly violent animals. Animals don't get prisoner rights. The casual dismissal of human rights drew approving nods from many in the crowd. After all, most species had heard the reports from the human front. Stories of humans who fought on even after suffering wounds that would have killed any rational being. Tales of human ships that rammed Kethmaran vessels rather than surrender. Accounts of human civilians who booby-trapped their own homes rather than submit to occupation. Clearly, these humans were simply too primitive to understand when they were beaten. But Skorth was watching Sarah's face carefully, and he saw something that the others missed. When Vextel dismissed humanity as mere animals, the girl's expression changed. The fear was still there, but it was now mixed with something else. Something that looked almost like pity. Very well, the old Draconic said slowly. I would like to purchase this human. The marketplace fell silent. Skorth was known to be wealthy beyond measure, but he had never shown interest in slaves before. His offer could easily outbid anyone else present, but Vextel's scales darkened to nearly black. I'm afraid she's not for sale, honored Skorth. The people demand entertainment, and tomorrow they shall have it. Skorth nodded slowly, but his golden eyes remained fixed on Sarah. Then perhaps I might make a small wager on tomorrow's entertainment? The betting pools erupted with new energy. If the ancient Draconic was willing to bet, perhaps this would be more interesting than they had initially thought. As the crowd dispersed to spread word of tomorrow's spectacle, none of them noticed Sarah's lips moving in what appeared to be a silent prayer. But Skorth, with his enhanced hearing, caught every word. She wasn't praying for rescue. She wasn't praying for salvation. She was apologizing.